Hi everyone, my name's Pam Lanuri, Head of Expedition Operations at Noble Caledonia, and we have with us here again John Love. John is going to talk to us today a little bit about one of all of our favorite expedition islands in the world. Happens to be very close to home for John and a place that he has spent quite a bit of time on. And this is, of course, St Kilda, following on from our lovely Hebrides talk that we already did last week. And who better to speak to about St Kilda than John, who wrote the book about it himself. It's available on Amazon. And he's going to share with us some of his stories from this amazing, enchanted little outpost of the Atlantic. How are you, John?
I'm very well indeed, surviving lockdown quite well. The Highlands and Islands have been quite a fortunate place to be in fact, on that score.
Yeah, I think you are quite lucky, hauled away from the madness that's going on everywhere else in the world. I'm going to crack right ahead and share with us the screen. Hold on a second. And then, John, fire away and talk to us about St Kilda.
Yes, well, this is the approach on a very calm day. And as some passengers will be aware, we can't always get days like that. It can be a rough trip, and it can also be ruled out altogether as a destination. But there is an advantage, which is, an expedition leader, Pam, is well aware, that we often look at the forecast in advance, and if we see a day, we can find plenty to do elsewhere in the Hebrides and approach St Kilda on the best day. And that way, in fact, to be honest, I've got nearly 100% landings. This is the problem, is the village bay coming in a zodiac. The pier you can see behind the zodiac there. The wreck is the material, it's long gone now. It's a fishing boat that went aground some years back. So the pier you'll see is an old one. It was extended by the army, who also put in these horrible gabion baskets to limit erosion, which are crumbling away. And personally, I think they should be removed altogether. And you can see in the winter, even in the summer, it can be like this. So the pier is just not possible. When I first went, a lot of people are disappointed when they see the base like this. The village, you can see the village street behind and the old cleats going up the hillside behind, but the base is rather ugly. When I first went there, it was even worse. In 1979 was my first visit, and it was very much as it had been built by the RAF for the Royal Artillery at the time in the late 50s. So, but that's been removed and other bits have been added to it, and it's been painted green now, or was for a long time, which blended in a bit better, I thought. But they've now, in the last couple of years, they've been rationalizing the whole thing. And this is, I haven't seen it, it is functional now, and they've removed most of the old stuff. So it should be an awful lot tidier. This is the base that is operated by now a private company called Kinetic, as the backstop radar for their rocket range, operated on behalf of the Ministry of Defence in South Uist. So there's a permanent staff, well, a rotating staff of about a dozen people, a lot more contractors at times, and it allows a lot of facilities for visitors and for volunteers and research workers. So it's been a good, although it's ugly, it's been a good partnership between everybody. So when we land, this is a First World War gun that was put in place just at the end of the First War because a submarine came into the bay and fired 70 shells at the village, giving them a warning first, so nobody was hurt. They were trying to hit the radio station that had been set up at number 1, and they did hit number 1, but the radio station was up and running the next day. So that's just a relic from the First World War. There are 3 aircraft wrecks from the Second World War. On arrival, there is the manse at the back, which was added to as the officers' mess to the left of it, and the church and school behind. So that's the first point of contact. We're often met by the National Trust Ranger, and there are various options available to the passengers, which can be a walk along the village street, there's Village Street, and there's 16 houses, but only 5 of them have been, 6 have been renovated. And it's a historical walk. There's lots to tell, and it's an easy walk. But some people might prefer something a bit more energetic, and there's a walk available up to the gap behind the village, which gives you a very fine view of Village Bay, and also views of the island. That last photo, the heather photo, was taken by Alan Hardwick. Lots of cleats. These are drying facilities where they stored the seabirds, dried the seabirds, peat, hay, whatever. So there's about 120 of them on Herta alone. Herta being the main island. The island you see in the background is Doon, which is attached at low tide, but very difficult access. That's where all the puffins nest. And in early spring and through the summer, we're always on the lookout for the St Kilda wren. It's very noisy. This is a singing male, a photo taken by Rick Price. And it's larger. It's a unique subspecies, similar to our wren, but it is unique to St Kilda, and there are several others similarly unique to Fair Isle and 1 or 2 other islands round and about. The sheep are everywhere. Soay sheep, they go back to prehistoric times, probably Iron Age, Neolithic farmers even, come in 2 colors, brown and black. And the lambs are quite the most endearing creatures you will ever find. They often look quite ragged-arsed, but they don't need clipped. They drop their fleece. So that's why they look very untidy. A lot of visitors think that they're suffering through lack of food. The numbers do build up and crash and build up and crash, but they're not actually, it seems, eating themselves out of house and home. There is a study going on to monitor all this and the behavior. Several books written about it by Cambridge University. And fulmars are nesting, or they sit on top of the cleats and they nest in some of the old buildings, but most of them are on the sea cliffs round and about. So once we've had a morning ashore, and the walks allow people plenty of time to wander around. Down there in the manse where we started, there is a shop which will be open with all sorts of St Kilda souvenirs, books and sweatshirts. In fact, this one, and lots of other things. So it's a great morning visit. We go back to the ship for lunch. And if we're really lucky and the weather is calming enough, we'll launch the Zodiacs and take passengers round Village Bay. And there is a cave, a tunneled cave, lots of puffins everywhere nesting on Doon. And we get really close views. And that tunnel cave, if weather conditions allow, we can go through in the Zodiac, and it's quite safe if the weather is favorable, and spectacular cliff scenes. But we can't always do that, but it's something we try to offer as an add-on. And then the ship embarks on circumnavigation, again, depending on conditions. You can see the track here, up the side of Doon, round Soay, and out to the stacks before we head off. And one of the things we pass, looking up on Doon, is the Lover's Stone, which you can see from the ship quite well, assuming there's no mist. And the story goes on the Lover's Stone that the St Kilda men would have to stand on it with their toes protruding out the top, over the top of it, and bend down and touch their toes. And if they survived that, they were obviously good climbers and make a good husband for somebody. I find that hard to believe, because this is the Lover's Stone. You can see it's a very phallic shape. And where does a phallus go? But into a hole. And the next is called the Maiden Stone, where maidens would announce their intention to marry. But I think the St Kildans were just having a big joke with the visitors, with telling them tales like that.
Hey,
But
John,
anyway.
I wanted to just circle back to that chart quickly, where you can see
Yeah.
the bay here where we anchor the vessel. You can see it's not exactly a wonderfully enclosed bay. It's not a huge amount of protection. So that's exactly what John was saying. We sometimes have to tweak the itinerary by a day or two, because this little island is just way out, sort of exposed to the whole Atlantic. And this bay, as you can see, it's relatively shallow. It's not like a deep, very well sheltered bay. So it is quite a thing to get it right. And we're lucky we've had such a success rate with St Kilda, and even getting on the Zodiacs hopefully as well. So just nice to see it on the chart like that.
That's it's an archipelago, a group of islands, and Herta is the main island where the village is, and you can see some of the stacks, and Borere on the far side, 4 miles away, Borere and its stacks in the background there. That's the rim of a collapsed volcano, and it's one of the few volcanic sites in the outer Hebrides. The inner Hebrides are full of them, but it's 55 million years old. The volcano's long since collapsed. So the center inside is much shallower than outside the volcano, and bathymetric maps show it up quite well. This is the highest point on St Kilda Conifer, and it's also the highest sheer cliff in the UK, and it's nearly 1,400 feet sheer drop into the sea. And you can see the radar station on the next highest point, Mullaghmore, just in the background. But from there we cut across the caldera to Borere and the stacks, and this to me is the highlight of a visit to St Kilda, because as you well know, it's utterly spectacular. The white one is Stack Lee, and there again, and it's got a lovely change of shape. The ship tries to go through the gap behind, and once or twice we've gone around the whole stack again, and it changes shape all the time. And it's got gannets, Borere's got gannets, and the other stack, which is actually, this is Stack Lee, and the men would go there every autumn to harvest gannets. And there's some bothies there that they would stay overnight or longer to harvest the gannets to store for the winter. And then Borere itself, it's about 1,200. Oh, that's the gannet colony at the top. On the flat top of Stack Lee, there's about 8,000 or 9,000 gannets nesting on that stack alone. There's about 40,000, 62,000 on the whole of St Kilda. It's the second largest gannet colony in the world, North Atlantic gannet colony. The largest now is the Bass Rock and the Firth of Forth. Gannets provide great opportunities for photos from the ship, and it's a good stable platform to do that. And even if there's a mist and you don't get clear weather, like most of these photos were taken on, I've been several dozen times, So I just picked the best photos, but it's still dramatic. That's about 1,200 feet high. And you can see the white ledges there covered with gannets. There's
It's
also some
actually,
sheep.
in some ways, it's more sort of moody and photogenic when it's misty like this. It's lovely and dramatic.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's true. This side is very rocky and steep. The other side is more sloping and green sward on it, which provides grazing for the Borere sheep. They're not quite as old as the Soay sheep. In fact, they're probably a cross between Soay's blackface and more primitive short wool sheep, Hebridean sheep. But there's still about 500 of them on Borere, completely feral like the ones on Soay. That's looking back towards Stack-and-Armon, which is the other stack, which is the tallest sea stack in the UK. I've forgotten exactly how high, but it's about 900 meters, I think. I can't think of it in feet. And this is my favorite corner of the island, because that sheer face of Stack-and-Armon is astonishing. Looking back to the flat edge of Stack Lee, behind is Herta and Soay, where eventually Soay became the refuge for the sheep. But they were reintroduced onto Herta once the blackface sheep were removed, the modern blackfaces were removed. You can see the different shapes between Stack-Lee on the left, Stack-and-Armon. But Stack-and-Armon has got a fascinating story to tell. Yeah, that's one of my favorite photos of St Kilda, I think. It's stunning. I was reluctant to show too many photos like this, but then I thought, okay, it might take the edge off when you go there, but when you're there, it's utterly spectacular, and you can't deprive that. The men would land there again to harvest gannets, and you can see this access. It was actually the last great auk on St Kilda was found here in 1848. It's always been said it was the last around 1840 that event happened. I've since discovered, looking through old records, that it probably took place in 1848, and the last great auk on the planet was killed. Two of them were killed in Iceland in 1844. But in fact, it now seems that the very last great auk on the planet was actually killed on St Kilda. There were subsequent sightings, but some of them are a bit difficult to confirm. But on that, about halfway up, the great auk was flightless, of course, so this is about the only access they could get. The men land there, and there are some bothies on which you can see halfway up. Yeah, there's several of them there, and the men would live there. And there's an amazing story that they went over in 1727, 3 adults and 8 youths, young men or boys, to harvest gannets. And they were dropped off and the boat rowed back to Herta, and it never came back. And so these men were stranded here on Stack-and-Armon from August 1727 right through to May of the following year, and they survived. And there were probably some sheep they put on there to graze. They had plenty of gannets. The water would have been pretty horrible, but eventually the factor came out from Harris in a boat and rescued them. But the reason that their boat hadn't returned was that there was a smallpox epidemic on Herta, and virtually the whole population back in Herta was wiped out. I think there was something like, including the 11 that survived on Stack-and-Armon, something like 20 odd people survived. And the island was very quickly repopulated by people probably sent out there from Harris, from Skye. It was owned by MacLeod of Dunvegan on Skye, and from Uist. So the population was built up again. But that's an unbelievable story of survival.
Yeah, it really is.
So looking back again with Stack Lee framed by Stack and Armon on the right and Borrery. Now this is an interesting story because on one of the trips I did, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, one of the passengers, Donald Hutchison, came up to me and said, my grandfather was on an expedition to St Kilda in 1910, and he and several others on the team climbed Stack Lee with the St Kildans as guides. And I said, I know who your grandfather was, and he's mentioned in a book by Oliver Pike, who organized the expedition. And Donald had an album of photographs of his grandfathers, most of them taken by Oliver Pike, who was a photographer. But he had it with him, he showed it to me, and he kindly allowed me to copy some of the photographs, some of which hadn't seen light of day recently. And the next slide shows one of the photographs that Oliver Pike, or Donald Hutchison, his grandfather, took of the villagers on Village Street, the village street. So the population reached a peak probably of about 170 way back in the 17th century, 18th, 17th century. The epidemic, smallpox epidemic, reduced it, but it built up again to about 70 or 80 people, and then slowly declined through the 19th century until early in the 20th century. The islanders, encouraged by the nurse who was stationed there at the time, decided to evacuate and leave. I think the government almost fueled that decision by denying them lots of opportunities that other islands might benefit from. So the government could have done more to keep the St Kildans there, but by then there were only 36 people left, and most of them were old people. This is the day of the evacuation, the 29th of August, 1930. You can see the women did all the work. And one of the families, Finlay Gillis and his wife and son, you can see the look on their face. They did not want to go. Utter bewilderment and sadness on the day of the evacuation. Finlay went on to live for until he was 70. He was 74 here on the day of the evacuation and went on to live for several. The young people were very keen to leave, realized that there was no future on St Kilda. And this is quite a famous one that some people still have met, Lachlan MacDonald. His father was drowned when a boat capsized in Village Bay when he was quite young. And the two men with him who also drowned were brothers to his wife, Lachlan's wife. He was 24 when he left St Kilda on the evacuation. And they were sent to Argyll, to Morvern in, is it West Inverness or Argyll? And this is a view of Morvern, completely different to St Kilda. It must have been quite a culture shock for them all. They were given, the government tried, but the Scottish office tried to keep them together as a unit, but they were fairly well spaced out in their accommodation and given jobs in the Forestry Commission. And the young men, this is Lachlan on the right and his elder brother Ewan working with the Forestry Commission in the nursery. And strange decision, because on St Kilda, although quite a few of these men had, or people in St Kilda had visited the mainland at some stage, but they wouldn't be too familiar with trees. And the tallest tree ever on St Kilda are dwarf willows, which are only about 4 inches tall. Oh, they were given jobs to plant trees as well as various other tasks. And this is a place in Morvern, in Argyll, a photo given to me by Ian Thornburgh, a good friend. And the St Kildans, because they were so good at rock climbing, were given the task to plant trees on the sheer face, which was one of the most active erosion places in the country. None of the other forestry workers wanted to go up there. They thought by planting trees, they would stabilize it. And in fact, now the trees have grown up. None of the current forestry workers want to go up there to harvest them. So some of the St Kildan's trees are still there. You can see the tallest of them on the sheer face. So it's an interesting, this is dwarf willow, 4 inches tall, maximum up the top of conifer. So that's a sad tale. They had no resistance to disease when they hit the mainland. And within 2 years, one man, aged 59, had died of TB. Another man had to have a lung removed. This is one of the houses Forestry Commission, well, actually State House, the Forestry Commission took over for the St Kildans. Some in poor state of repair, but they had upstairs and downstairs and all sorts of things that they wouldn't be familiar with. About 3 families lived at Larrick Beck. Another family, the McKinnons, lived here and worked for the Forestry Commission, but within 6 years of setting up home here, they died. 4 children died of TB in the same family. The parents also suffered, but they recovered. And but the whole family was then moved to the Black Isle, where it was drier and more conducive for their survival. So the St Kildans gradually dispersed out from Morvern. And this is Lachlan on the right with Neil Gillis, a cousin, I think, who used to come to the St Kilda reunions. I think this was in the 1970s. Lachlan, they went on to live to their 90s in Glasgow. Lachlan, I think, was in Fort William. And they were great storytellers. They loved, Neil used to go back in the summer after the evacuation until the Second War as a warden for Lord Dumfries, who owned the island, along with his mother and Finlay McQueen and 1 or 2 others, but they had to give up when the war started. But Lachlan was a great storyteller, always very popular, and they went back to St Kilda in the 70s once or twice as well. So that's what happened to the poor St Kildans. And now, of course, there are new St Kildans, if you like, working on the base, working for Kinetic. There used to be an army. When I first went there, there were 30 squaddies from the Royal Artillery and 1 officer, 3 battalion sergeant majors. But the officer dined in regal splendor in the officer's mess as the only person with silver service, of course. And the squaddies, some of them hated it, but others were very good and helped with sheep roundups for marking, bird censuses and all sorts of things. So it was quite a partnership. And then in 1958, it became a national nature reserve. Lord Dumfries presented it to the National Trust for Scotland, who are the current owners, and they've sent out teams of volunteers, and one of their cruise ships, or the cruises they used to run, go out. I think actually the Noble are doing one in the Serenissima on behalf of the National Trust. Should have been last July. I should have been there, and it's on again the next year, hopefully. Fingers crossed. So it's been a nature reserve and a World Heritage Site and all sorts of things. So it's an amazing place to visit, and a highlight for everybody, I think, on our cruises who go there. This is leaving St Kilda, always a poignant moment, and a brief visit, less than 24 hours, but if you can get there, then you can feel satisfied. We always feel as a team that we've done our job if we've got everybody to St Kilda, and we can relax. It's all downhill after that. So, and it's due to people like you, Pam, and others who organise the whole thing.
You're so right, John. There's very much huge level of pressure to pull off St Kilda. It sort of weighs, the pressure weighs on us until we've, got it done. And as you said, we might have to tweak that itinerary a little bit to pick the weather day because it is exposed. But you can go there a dozen times, you can go there 20 times. It's sort of kind of easy by ship, where it's quite hard to get to if you weren't just, cruising overnight and landing up there in the morning. But you never get tired of going there. It's just such a magical place. You sort of get I loved how you showed the image of arriving and the image of leaving. People are always out on deck to watch the arrival and watch the departure. It's just this really mystical island that's steeped in so much history and lovely stories. So it's so nice of you to share some of those stories with us.
Yeah. As you say, it's difficult to get there any other way. There are day trips from Liverpool, and I would highly recommend them. They take several hours to go out in a very comfortable launch with Angus Campbell and some of his colleagues who have great personal knowledge of St Kilda. So you can do that for a day, and they give you great value. Or you can maybe sign up to a work party with the National Trust for Scotland. There is a facility to camp, but there's so few toilet facilities and fresh water that often, I think the Trust limits the number of campers, and it can be pretty windy anyway. Poor soldiers had to set up camp there in the early days and suffered some ferocious storms before they got all mod cons.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe that story about the guys stuck on Stacken Armand for all those months. It really is so much interesting history around the islands, and I'm sure there's even more that we don't even know about. It's just absolutely, just gives you that like excitement in your belly as you're approaching the islands. I don't know what it is, the stacks, the drama, the birds, but there's just all this tales around it as well. It just makes it such a special destination.
Absolutely, yes.
John, just thanks so much. It's always great hearing your tales, and obviously to see you as well. So thanks so much for giving us your time, and we'll hopefully do another piece on some other wonderful part of all these lovely Atlantic islands soon.
Okay, great to see you, Pam.
Take care, John. Bye.